Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm your host, Ramita Iyer, a research analyst at the Institute. This year, India celebrates 75 years of independence and foreign policy making, where much has changed and remain unchanged both domestically and internationally. In this episode, we look at India's strategic choices in a seemingly shifting world order. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor C. Mohan, Senior Fellow at the Asia Society Policy Institute in New Delhi and Visiting Research Professor at ISAS. Professor Mohan, welcome to South Asia Chat.
Thank you, Ramita. Wonderful to be here.
In early September, the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation, or the SCO in short, held its 22nd summit meeting. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended it, marking the first time that he came face-to-face with Chinese President Xi Jinping since the beginning of the Galwan conflict in Ladakh 2 years ago. Apart from the India-China tensions, we've also seen in recent times the SCO's larger purpose increasingly being called into question due to serious internal disagreements within the group. Given that India is set to host the summit next year, what are your thoughts on how Delhi can benefit from the grouping?
I think the principal objective for India is to limit the existing, in fact, most of the time people don't talk about those internal conflicts. But the conflicts are real. I mean, between India, China, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran. So I think there are real differences within. And now we are seeing new fractures in the region. The conflict between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which are members. So what you have is that the region is a fragmented one. And the unifying attempt by China and Russia was initially seen as a positive thing. But today, the kind of anti-American, anti-Western orientation they want to give it makes it even more complicated. I don't think all the members are on board with that agenda of wanting to be an anti-Western coalition, while China and Russia are trying to push it in that direction. So I think India, as someone which has good relationship with Russia and with the United States, can play a more moderating, balancing role in the region. So its chairmanship, which is India has taken over. So in the next year or so, I think it should focus more on how does it connect with the Central Asian countries. Because right now, India physically has no access. So that's been one of the limiting factors on India's engagement with the region, on trade, commerce, etc. India has been trying to build a network through Iran. In fact, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech at the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation was focused on improving connectivity, of developing connectivity. So I think that will be one major factor. Second, I think, is how does India bring in new areas of cooperation? Because one is physical connectivity. Other is how do we do more digital, more innovation, investments. So that you don't need physical access for that. So can India bring in some of its capabilities to play a larger role in the economic evolution of the region? So I would say on its own, national interest is in improving connectivity and of engagement. Two, at the regional level, reduce the internal conflicts, try and moderate them. And third, globally, avoid a ideological organization, but one that can be a bridge between Europe and Asia and between East and the West.
Focusing on another area of tension, the Russian war in Ukraine has complicated India's ties with key partners, including Moscow and Washington. Until recently, India maintained a rather neutral stance on the issue, which was not taken very well by its Western partners, including the US. But at the recent SCO summit, Modi, in an apparent critique of Russia, told Putin that this is not an era of war. What are your thoughts on India's strategy in this respect?
I think some of the criticism of India's position as neutrality from the Western media has been somewhat, overstated criticism, because early on it was not clear where the war was going. So India, after the initial few days, it kept emphasizing the question of sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is the main question. Because India was not jumping into the bandwagon of simply attacking Russia, because India had serious stakes in the relationship. One was the whole question of weapon supply for India. because India is locked in military tensions with China on the border. Therefore, ensuring the supply of military equipment was a major consideration. Second, I think India also does not want Russia to become totally dependent on China, so that there is a regional balance, and that therefore they were hoping to keep Russia engaged and to avoid the total isolation of Russia. But I think today, 6-7 months after the war, the situation is different. One, I think Russia is doing badly, and it's quite clear Russians have no way out of this. And therefore, I think Prime Minister Modi chose the time to mention that, look, you must get back to diplomacy. I think continuing down this path is not good for Russia, it's not good for the world. And the third aspect is for India, which has faced severe economic consequences, both in terms of high fuel prices, inflation, food security, so many areas where India is vulnerable to the new dynamic that has emerged. So therefore today I think India does not want to be seen as something just supporting Russia in this situation. But that at the same time, India also wants to take a more balanced position. One, publicly expressing concerns about Russia's policy, and two, try and create conditions where actually the issue can be resolved. So, but I think we're coming to a denouement, and it is going to get a lot more trickier and complicated depending on what President Putin does in Ukraine, and if they're going to do new mobilization, if they're going to do a referendum and annex the region. So India's situation will get harder. So in some senses, by distancing himself from Putin's Ukraine policy, I think India has also increased its options, and that it is not simply just going to follow Russia on this issue.
Moving our focus broadly to the Indo-Pacific region, we've also seen a shift away from multilateralism to plurilateralism or minilateralism. India too has been actively involved with such groupings. It is one of the 4 members of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad. It is also one of the 13 partner countries of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, or the IPEF in short, that's being led by the United States. What is your assessment of the potential of minilaterals as instruments of international cooperation and governance?
It's quite interesting. I think the Quad is not the only minilateral India is present. It's also in the BRICS. You could argue BRICS is also, it's not a regional forum, it's a global minilateral forum. So my sense is, after the end of the Cold War, when India's traditional emphasis on non-aligned movement, multilateralism, G77, etc., the question of India's new interests and concerns saw India actually began to undertake minilateral format, with the BRICS was the first one. And then Shanghai Cooperation was more of a regional organization, but BRICS was one of them. And we also saw India embark on the Quad-related initiatives going back to 2007. But while the BRICS moved very quickly through the last 20 years, Quad has been far more slower evolution. But as India-China contradictions have become stronger in the last 4 years because of the frequent military crisis on the border, we've had a conflict in 2013, 2014, 2017 and 2020. Since then, we've seen India's need to limit China's unilateralism. India's interest in producing a balance of power in Asia has seen India now double down a lot on the Quad and other minilaterals. For example, India, Australia, Indonesia, or India, France, and the United Arab Emirates. So I think India is experimenting with a lot of these kind of groupings, which would, somewhere between merely simply doing, national policy to very grand multilateralism or to regionalism. I think the minilateralism of different kinds opens up a new space and greater functionality and ability to influence a larger set of issues. And India is also participating in the G10, for example, that is the G7 plus. Last few years, India has been invited. So my sense is the shift is, initially the focus was on creating a multipolar world, which meant that's the reason why India got close to Russia and China. But today, India is also working very closely with the US to produce a multipolar Asia that is that initially the fear of the West saw BRICS, but now the problems with China are seeing more West-related minilateral institutions coming up.
You mentioned Central Asia earlier, a region that has become another important piece in India's strategic puzzle. Earlier this year, we witnessed the first ever summit between India and the 5 leaders of Central Asia, which put a renewed focus on deepening cooperation on connectivity and issues of security. What is the importance of Central Asia for India, and are there any challenges that you foresee in this respect?
No, I think there are many challenges because while India's enthusiasm for Central Asia was there from the beginning, but the problem has been India's economic, trade, and other relationships have been fairly limited. So, if you go back to history, I mean, in a sense, India and Central Asia were directly connected, where many of the, the movement of people from Central Asia, the Mughals who came from there, and the Gandhara kingdom, which kind of ruled simultaneously over Central Asia as well as South Asia. So those, and when by the time we came to the British Empire, it was the empire. Raj was in a great game contestation with the Russian Empire, and you saw that time Indian Army, Indian institutions take a large interest in the Central Asian region. And then comes partition, where India's geographic access to Central Asia is cut off because the way the territorial division took place, and Pakistan was a bloc, and India's negative relationship with Pakistan meant India could not directly relate to the region. But then thanks to the Soviet relationship, India was given a privileged access to parts of Central Asia because India was a friend of the Soviet Union. India had a consulate in Tashkent, and and there was a lot of engagement on the cultural and other sides. And that's the reason why you see the popularity of the Indian cinema and Raj Kapoor, and you saw the other day at the SCO summit, they were belting out some Bollywood songs as part of the entertainment. So on the soft power side, because of the deep connection during the Soviet era and the cultural similarity and affinity, we see a lot of India's impact of soft power. But on the economic side, the absence of connectivity saw a significant limitation. The second factor that has emerged is the rise of China. In the past, China and Russia were at odds with each other. But as China and Russia became friends, and China's economy grew rapidly to the second largest economy today, and China has physical borders with Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. So China's economic weight has dramatically improved in the Central Asian region, and a Sino-Russian strategic partnership combined with Chinese economic might, I think, produces new concerns for India. How does it ensure a more balanced region? So for this, I think India has historically depended on Russia. But now it must look at other partners, doing more with Iran. I mean, beyond the Chabahar port and the route into Central Asia, Turkey is an important player. We saw at the SCO summit, Prime Minister Modi meeting with President Erdogan. For the first time, there seems to be some relaxation of the bad mood between India and Turkey for the last 3 years. So I think India will have to find other partners to work in Central Asia, because you're not going to get physical access anytime soon. Other important actor in the region is European Union. So can India work with the European Union? Because don't forget, historically, because Soviet Union is part of the European institutions, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. So Europe has a lot of linkages into the post-Soviet space. They're active, for example, in the Caucasus. They also have an interest in the Central Asian region. So I think European Union could be another partner. And finally, I would say India should also work with Japan and South Korea, which have large investments in the region. And I don't think we have thought about, while we talk about the Indo-Pacific, we've not thought of Japan and Korea as potential players in the Central Asian region.
Closing off our discussion today by looking at India's immediate South Asian neighborhood, in an article that you wrote a few months ago, you reflected on developments in Pakistan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, and emphasized on the need to reframe regional ties, working with the logic of geography in the subcontinent. Could you elaborate on this?
Look, I think what happened after partition created new boundaries, new conflicts. between India, Pakistan, and then you had Pakistan, West Pakistan, and East Pakistan. And then China came into Tibet. So the new sovereignties and the new boundaries that emerged took a lot of India's energies in managing that. This would have been manageable if India had not turned inwards economically. That is, there were political divisions, but India chose an economic path that was inward oriented, which meant it was, whether it was socialism or whether it was state-led economic development, which it meant India was not interested in trade, India was not interested in connectivity. So it all became focused inwards. The emphasis on, self-reliance, and keep import substitution. So what happened was it kind of frittered away the natural connectivities, even between India and Nepal, which have an open border, India, Sri Lanka. Why is it today China is a bigger trading partner to South Asian countries? Because India was inward oriented and it opened up much later than China. And it was not willing to think of its borders as zones of cooperation. So, for example, how much Nepal wants to do things with China, its geography is tied to India. That is, the plains of Nepal are linked to, the Gangetic Plain, and the natural flows of people is to the south. So we must build on the geography rather than, treating as completely separate units. Or India and Bangladesh have almost 4,000 kilometers of border. Now, do you fence that border, or do you think of that border as actually facilitating movement of people, migrate? How do you regulate the migration? How do you movement of labor and capital? So in the sense, in the past, the securitization dominated the discourse on the boundaries. But today I think we need to think about economic, people-oriented boundaries which can actually benefit the prosperity, progress of all the countries involved in South Asia. With Pakistan, it's going to be a lot more challenging. But with the rest of the region, if you work with geography as opposed to working against it, then I think there will be benefits which have not, it's only beginning to be realized, because today Indian government does talk about connectivity, trade facilitation, cross-border projects. We've been slower at it. China has done a lot more with Southeast Asia. So India has a lot of catching up to do on regional integration, regional connections, where you leverage geography for the benefit of both sides, rather than securitizing the boundaries and preventing a natural flow of commerce and trade across the borders.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Professor Mohan. You were listening to South Asia Chat. To get more updates on our work, visit our website at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.